Afternoon, House Taxation Committee will come to order. First item on the agenda is request for bill introductions. Do we have any requests? Chair would recognize Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 21 RS 0176, and this is a bill that returns the sales tax on automobiles to where it resides, not where it is sold.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative Corbett.
Would that just be a destination on automobiles only, not everything, just one item? Just doing,
Well, my bill just has automobiles, but I assume you could also bring an amendment.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, any objection? Seeing none, the request is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, I also have a request. It is 21 RS 0007, with apologies to Mr. Bond. And it is an act concerning tobacco products relating to the sale thereof, remitting certain payments from tobacco product manufacturers to the credit of the Kansas Endowment for Youth Fund, rather than depositing into escrow upon certification by the Attorney General. And as you can see, that's another request on behalf of a non-exempt committee. So, are there any questions? Seeing none, any objections to the request? Seeing none, the request is approved. Any further bill requests? Seeing none, we will move right on to the hearing for House Bill 2445. And I would look first to the revisor's office for a brief overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2445 provides for a property tax exemption for properties used by a health club. Under the bill, health club includes a business whose primary purpose is to offer facilities that contain cardio, weight training, or strength and conditioning equipment, or any combination thereof, for the preservation, maintenance, encouragement, or development of physical fitness in return for the payment of a fee that entitles the payer to the use of such facilities. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, we will move on to the fiscal note and look to Department of Revenue for an overview on the fiscal note, please.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Kansas Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue estimates that House Bill 2445 would decrease property tax revenues. However, we do not have data on the assessed valuation of the specific property that would receive this property tax exemption to make a precise estimate of the amount of reduced property tax revenue. With that, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. Committee, any questions for Department of Revenue? Seeing none, we will open up proponent testimony and would like to first welcome Lynn Jenkins on behalf of the Kansas Health and Fitness Association. Welcome to committee. I don't think your mic's on.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ranking Member Gartner, Vice Chairman Mason, and honorable members of the House Committee on Tax. It is a pleasure to be here again this afternoon. My name is Lynn Jenkins, and I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Health and Fitness Association, who represents private sector tax-paying health clubs in Kansas. Kansas health clubs are in a unique situation. These facilities fully expect a competitive industry, and they spend every day adapting and growing to stay ahead of their competition. However, increasingly, their competition is not other private sector clubs, but government-owned health clubs who pay no taxes at all. While government-owned entities certainly compete in other industries, this is the only industry in Kansas that I'm aware of where tax-paying clubs represent such a small portion of the market compared to other large facilities that pay absolutely no sales tax, no income tax, and no property tax. These non-tax-paying facilities currently have a value of over $300 million and growing. Local government-operated health clubs have spent over $100 million in the last 15 years alone on gigantic facilities, in many cases forcing nearby private sector competition out of business due to an unlevel playing field. The irony is that although mill levies flowing to recreation commissions, school districts, and other government entities, struggling tax-paying clubs are forced to pay to build and fund their competition. In addition, if there are shortfalls in those operations, additional tax money flows to fund the ongoing operation of government facilities. So not only do their competitors pay no taxes, but many are funded by taxes paid by KHFA eligible clubs. As with many problems, this disparity was further exacerbated by COVID-19. Health clubs were forced to close for nearly 2 months last year and continue to deal with mandated reduced capacity upon reopening. During the closure period, our competitors were able to turn off the lights, lay off employees, and have minimal ongoing expenses. Tax-paying clubs, however, still had property taxes accruing. Therefore, I'm here today to speak in support of House Bill 2445 that would give the same property tax treatment to all Kansas health clubs, regardless of who owns them. This bill would not include any sales or income tax exemptions, which for-profit clubs would continue to pay. As a former legislator, I fully understand the importance of protecting the tax base. However, the failure to adopt this legislation proposes a greater threat to the tax base than its adoption. Over the past 2 decades, when government-owned health clubs began their aggressive expansion, over 150 taxpayer clubs have closed. Since members of for-profit health clubs pay sales tax every time a club closes and members go to a non-tax-paying facility, the tax base shrinks. The state loses approximately $35 per year in sales tax from every member that goes from a tax-paying club to one that does not pay taxes. This costs the state over $5 million annually and growing. I thank the committee for your time this afternoon and urge adoption of House Bill 2445 to remove the unfair tax treatment between competitors. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, committee. We will hold questions until the end of the proponent section. Next on the list, we have Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber. Haven't been here for a while to talk property taxes, so it's good to be back. Hope the committee is doing good work this year. And here to speak in support of House Bill 2445. Really, this is Congresswoman Jenkins did a good job summarizing the issue here, and this is something that's been around. I think it was back in 2014 there was an effort to try to get this done, to get essentially a level playing field between the for-profit and not-for-profit health clubs. It was briefly mentioned that about obviously the focus here is on property taxes, but you have the sales tax component on memberships as well. That for-profit entities have to cover. And so it's either really your political options is this approach, or tax the property that is a non-community service-based piece of property of the nonprofit entities, tax the fitness equipment, but not the parts that are utilized, classrooms or anything else that's utilized for community-based events. But how do you break those out? And that's going to be the challenge. So again, I think this is a fair approach. It's limited in its application, and we would ask for your support of House Bill 2445. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Our next conferee is Greg Ferris with the Kansas Health and Fitness Association. Welcome to committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Greg Ferris. I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. You had a long day. I will not be redundant, and you have my written testimony, so I will be as brief as possible. I've been with the Kansas Health and Fitness Association for over 15 years. While we are adding new members each year, the original members, there's only 1 or 2 clubs left of our original members. from back 15 years ago. And that's because they found it very difficult to compete against the growing nonprofit and community-based health services. When you look and see that not only are we having the disadvantages of property tax, but when we buy goods and services, we're paying 6 or 7% more for everything we purchase. We are also charging our members an additional 6 or 7 or 8%, depending on what community you're in, for their membership dues. So instantly, our fees are higher, and we're paying more for our goods and services. When you look at some of the smaller communities where clubs have existed, it becomes very difficult for them to compete side by side with mega government-run facilities. And it's very unfortunate in that we are seeing these close because typically we pay more for our help. So we're losing jobs, you're losing income tax, as well as you're losing a majority of sales tax, as the Congresswoman spoke to. The fiscal note, as you heard, was a little bit hard to nail down if you don't go back and do a ton of research and pull every facility in the state, which I happen to have done. And the state fiscal note is in the $50,000–$55,000 range, so that would be the amount of property tax lost by the state. There would be a greater loss to some counties, but half of the taxes that would be lost is in one county. That county loss would be somewhere around $2.2 million a year. During the last 10 years, that county has spent, either its cities, schools, or county has spent over $100 million. So the $2 million that they might lose pales to the amount that they're spending each year in debt service and other expenses. So had they not been spending this enormous amount of money, they would not be facing. Other counties have a very minimal amount, the largest being $700,000. And that's a very large county that has a budget that approaches $1 billion. So you can see that this is a very minimal amount, but it's very important to be able to have this industry succeed in our state. We have thousands of employees. We pay significant amounts of money to our employees, and we're finding that these clubs are closing at a rapid rate. I would hope that you would look at this seriously and consider passing that, and I'll be available for questions. I have, while Lynn is our major spokesperson, I happen to have a lot of the background information and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Our last verbal conferee is Blair Tanner with Club Woodside. Is Blair with us today? Written only, possibly? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody online here, so we will consider that written only testimony. Is there anyone else wishing to appear verbally as a proponent for House Bill 2445? Seeing none, we will now open up for questions for any of the proponents. Committee members, I would just ask that you identify the conferee that you'd like to address your question to. Are there any questions? Representative Corbett.
This should be for Mr. Stafford.
Sir.
The bill addresses what it addresses, but it's just not, it's a little more than that, really. It's not just gyms and whatever for property tax. You can take, for example, just here in Shawnee County, people who are in business have to compete with the state and the county, city, their meeting rooms and hospitality, whatever they have to do. And it's bigger than you might think, and I understand where they're coming from, but it makes it tough in any state for private business to be paying the full load and we're doing the same thing and paying nothing. You see where you're coming from.
Yeah, Representative, good point. I know we took a call, I don't know, it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago from a lady who was not a member of ours. Her and her family had just recently purchased some facilities close to a state park, and made that investment for their family, for campers and folks who like to spend time outdoors. And then the state invested in several, I think $50,000 or $100,000 cabins to have on property that were directly competing with similar structures that she was offering or her family was offering at their facility. So yeah, exact same issue, but probably begs for a big comprehensive review of property taxes. You know, I know my wife and I get together every Christmas with friends of ours for a Christmas dinner, and this year was in Kansas City off 87th and 435 in the new downtown Lenexa. And you know, Sunday morning after our dinner, we're getting ready to drive home and go to the coffee store and see a fancy building right between the two streets, and there's Lenexa Health Center, Health and Fitness Center, and it's a beautiful gym right there off of 87th Street. And you think, okay, you know, you have taxpayers get this benefit if they're a resident of that area, but I think one of the key points is that those taxpayers are subsidizing the competition against people who take risks to have a business, no matter what the business is. So, yeah.
Any further questions? Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is probably for Greg, but Len Jenkins could also answer, whoever wants to, specifically about the different fitness facilities. I live in Lenexa City Center, actually across the street from that beautiful gym, which I used to be a member of until COVID hit. Since the things have reopened and been fully vaccinated, I feel safe going back to the fitness centers. So if this were to pass, would this apply to, say, Genesis Health Club 10 minutes from me, Lifetime Fitness across the street from me, the Planet Fitness 8 minutes down the road, and Anytime Fitness about 6 minutes from where I live?
I would say probably yes to most of those. I'd have to look at each individual one. We modeled this after the language that applies to nonprofits. And so there's some owner-occupied language that's in the nonprofit language, and we didn't feel that we should be asking for a benefit that was not allowed to everyone else. So yes, that would definitely apply to Lifetime, Genesis. I didn't hear a couple of the others, so I would suspect yes.
A follow-up, if I may. So all of these, except for with the exception of Planet Fitness, because I was a member at Lenexa Rec Center, all of those membership fees offer similar, obviously, amenities, but all of those membership fees are significantly higher than what is offered at the Lenexa Rec Center. If this were to pass, should members of those facilities expect a lower membership fee?
I would think that there would be some lower. It would depend on each individual club. I know that some of our clubs have said they actually would love to be able to lower their memberships to compete. We do have the disadvantage of if your membership's $40, we're going to charge you an extra $2, and well, in Lenexa it's higher than that because your taxes are higher. So though that sales tax is not going to change, so that would continue to be that way. Our goal has always been to try and lower our fees to match our competition as much as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further questions, committee? Representative Sawyer. Clayton, pardon.
That's okay. I go by either, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ferris, this question is for you. Sorry, I guess you're getting some exercise, though, and we could all encourage that for all of us, right? So in any case, my question is this. My family has benefited tremendously from some of the child care options that have been offered both by Johnson County Parks and Recreation as well as the YMCA. And I have had to take advantage of child care options offered by a health club that is no longer in existence in my area. So I'm curious just to hear, if you all got this exemption, would you be expanding child care options? Because, you know, gosh, that's how I've been able to be a legislator here today, is
Sure.
that. So.
We would not expect to get into the child care business. However, I can't speak for every club because I've not been in every single one of our member clubs. I know that some of the larger clubs have extensive child care inside their clubs, but it's usually only for those that are working out. So we are not trying to compete with the the child care services that are provided by daycares and those types of things. But we do provide that for our members. They also have, many of our clubs have evenings where you can drop your kids off, the typical mom's days out kind of activity. So we do have some of those as well. But I would not expect us to be doing this universally because we don't believe we should be competing with, and so actually we would be getting an advantage by doing that, and we aren't looking for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think part of the reason why I do support these exemptions for these other entities is because they are providing for the public good and helping people get back to work at an affordable price. So, but thank you for answering my question.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Greg, while you're still up there, would you mind a quick question for myself? You've obviously compiled some data, it sounds like, on this. I'm from extreme northwest Kansas, and I'm assuming your data is probably limited just to your membership, but I know out in smaller communities, most of the public gyms, if you can even call them that, sometimes they're literally just an open space for people to come, and it's more of an activity center. But do you have any data from western Kansas on how many members you might have and how many would be impacted by a competing public-owned facility?
Ironically, there aren't a lot of clubs in western Kansas. We did have a very large one in Garden City that when a nonprofit opened across the street from it, that had been a family business for 30 or 40 years, they closed within 3 years because they couldn't compete. But as I look across the counties that I know that we have clubs, and what I did was go through virtually every county in the state to try to see where there would be an impact from a tax standpoint. There are probably not a significant impact to any western or northwestern counties from a standpoint of taxes, because there just aren't, we just don't have the clubs in those areas that would be qualified under this bill.
Thank you. Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another question for you.
I'm not leaving. Do you tell me to?
So it sounds like there's multiple taxes right now that private clubs are faced, that nonprofits are. So if we were to grant the property tax exemption, would it then be necessary to do other exemptions to get you on 100% playing field with sales tax, et cetera?
I'm going to be honest. Obviously, we believe that sales tax should be exempt. It's a sizable note to the state. We recognize the state's financial situation and that you have some challenges. The biggest issue with sales tax, it's a bit ironic if she belongs to the YMCA and I belong to Lifetime Fitness. It isn't Lifetime Fitness or the YMCA that's paying or not paying that tax, it's me. So I'm paying a tax that she's not based on where she goes. So we've always felt that was extremely unfair to our members. It does not have, we think it should be corrected, but we are not asking for that, and we don't anticipate asking for that in the near future. We probably would think you should charge everybody the same. Sales tax is probably the one tax across the country that is treated most commonly for profit, nonprofit, and government facilities, so that you can, I mean, when I play golf, I rent a cart, I have to pay sales tax, even if I'm playing at the municipal facility. So it wouldn't be uncommon for you to charge everybody a sales tax. We think that's probably what you should do if you ever get the stomach to do that. I don't know if that answered your question, sir.
That's sufficient. And then last question, if this were to be granted, would the clubs be using this money they're saving to reinvest into the club, or is it?
Absolutely. We reinvest tens of thousands of dollars a year, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in some clubs. It would allow us to hire additional employees, provide better service to our members. You know, our goal is to provide the highest level of service at what we can afford to still, we do still need to make a profit, or we're going to end up like the Garden City Club that closes down if you're not making a profit. But yes, we're planning to use this to reinvest, to grow our clubs, to make them bigger, better, bring in more people. Fitness is important, and I'm not going to get on my soapbox, but fitness is very important to the health of Kansas. The amount of money that businesses can save by having a healthy workforce is phenomenal. That's why we're not attacking the YMCA or these clubs. We just think it's unfair that you're building these at our expense.
Thank you.
Further questions, committee? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one will be for Congressman Jenkins. So, Lynn, would the association that you represent find it fair if the not-for-profit clubs paid property tax?
Well, we think fairness is equality across the board, but we're not here, I mean, honestly, today seeking fairness. We're just trying to correct one small piece, and that's the property tax.
Okay, but if they were paying property taxes, you'd be on a level playing field.
We would.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any further questions? Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Lynn Jenkins. I'm sorry, she's already gone again. But I just heard you say this is only correcting one small part, but actually we can't correct that one small part. That would just be where there's a competitive situation between the city-owned facility and the privately owned gym. So this exemption would be for all gyms everywhere, not just those in competitive closeness, I guess, or whatever the word is. Is that correct?
It would be leveling the playing field if the YMCA owns a facility and the gym, private for-profit, owns the facility, then they would be on a level playing field. They would both be exempt from property tax.
But this solution gives an exemption for all clubs, not just those clubs that are near to city-owned or Y clubs.
Not to all clubs, just clubs that are owning their facilities.
Representative, if I could answer your question, I think I know. There is only one county in the state where there is not either a nonprofit or a government-owned facility. I think it happens to be one of the counties represented here is Montgomery County. Their tax liability would be $2,300 for the two clubs that are there. That's the only county in the state where one of our clubs would be exempt and there is no competition. Well, I'm talking about as I looked at counties where clubs existed, that is the only county where clubs exist where there is not competition in a close radius to them. Did that get to what you...
Right, but I think you're drawing it down to counties, correct? So you're saying...
Excuse me?
I think you're drawing it down to county footprint, so within that county...
Well, it was just easier to look at counties from a tax standpoint. The majority of clubs and also the majority of either nonprofits or government facilities are in the cities in those counties. So I would say, as I looked through this, I think there was one club that wasn't within a 4-mile radius, and it was a half-a-mile difference.
Representative Corbett.
While you're there, just to follow on what he's speaking about, it's almost for sure, the way things are now, there won't be any more private clubs probably going up, especially due to what we had on the COVID situation where they paid their taxes and couldn't be open. But just like this, there's no way a guy's going to go in there right now probably and start another health club. You've got the city and the county and whoever having the same operation and paying no taxes. It's kind of, if you want the industry to grow, you've got to give it a little bit of breathing room, I would think.
You're correct. It becomes very difficult. We did have a club recently, last year, the year before, go into Derby. Even though that club has to pay $2 million to subsidize the memberships of the competing club. but they are few and far between that new clubs are being constructed. I think there's probably been 3 or 4 in the last 6 or 7 years that have been new clubs that were constructed.
Any further questions, committee? Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually for Lynn. I just wanted to follow up real quick on one of the previous representatives' comments. I think if I understood that correctly, the question was, if the non-for-profits started paying property tax, would you be on a level playing field? If I understood that correctly, when in fact you would still not be on a level playing field because you still pay an exorbitant amount of taxes, even if they were to match you with property tax payments. Is that correct?
That is correct, but probably more importantly is you still have the government-run facilities that aren't paying property tax, which is kind of the biggest concern right now. So, yes.
Further questions, committee? Seeing none, we will draw your attention to written-only testimony from Matt Lilly, Optilife Vitality Club and Spa, and Jeffrey Perkins, International Health, Racket, and Sports Club Association. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent on House Bill 2445? Seeing none, we will close that section of the hearing and open up the opponent testimony and welcome first to committee Jay Hall with the Kansas Association of Counties.
Thank you, Representative Smith and members of the committee. I realize you've had a long day on the floor, so I will be brief with my comments. Our main concern here is the precedent that will be set if we exempt a for-profit business from property taxes. While I understand some of the comments that were made by the proponents, our concern is that if we start exempting for-profit businesses from taxation, that the next time it will be a different business requesting exemption based on a different set of circumstances. And those are a concern of ours. If you look at the list that's in the bill of the exemptions, you will see that all of those exemptions are for not-for-profits or for religious organizations or for educational types of entities. And so I think it's very important that as you as the committee look at this piece of legislation, that you keep in mind that this is really quite a big shift to add a completely new category of entity to the tax exemptions. And so I would encourage you to look at that, and that is why KAC is opposed to this particular piece of legislation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else wishing to appear verbally as an opponent to House Bill 2445? Chair recognizes Trey Cocking, League of Kansas Municipalities.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Thank you for allowing us to testify today on this issue. Property tax exemptions equal higher taxes for everybody else. Let's be clear. That's what this does. This is not letting them out of their taxes. This is saying to the little old lady who can barely pay her taxes, you have to pay a little bit more so the people who can afford an expensive gym membership can pay a little bit less. And that is what you are doing if you approve this, especially with the passage of Senate Bill 13. Senate Bill 13, if somebody keeps a tax neutral rate, and now we take off these health clubs, that means that that bigger portion goes onto the goes on the property tax bills of those who can least afford it. And that is what you guys would be doing here, is you guys would be picking winners and losers and saying, hey, Mrs. Smith, you're going to pay more because we chose to give this tax exemption. Government-ran health clubs and not-for-profits serve a very distinct purpose. They give reduced rates. They give free rates. I was on the YMCA's fundraising board in Atchison. Their executive director would meet with people. They would look over their income, and they would charge them a very low fee if that's what they could afford, because that was part of their mission. I don't know that the same is true for the for-profit health clubs. Another thing is there's nothing that prevents a for-profit from reorganizing as a not-for-profit. If they wanted to, they would just have to meet those mission elements, but they choose to be a for-profit so that they can take the profits and put it in their pocket instead of putting it back in the community, as cities and YMCAs, the YWCAs, have chosen to do with their memberships. We have a strong position against narrowing the tax base, and that's exactly what this bill would do, would be to narrow the tax base and make it more expensive for others. So we strongly stand against this bill, and I'll stand for any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as an opponent to House Bill 2445? Seeing none at this time, we will open it up for questions. Committee, any questions for the opponents? Representative Wassinger.
First, thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I wondered how many nonprofits there were of health clubs versus for-profit, if we could see what that difference was. And also, I wanted to ask both of you if you would support, as an alternative, taxing the nonprofits.
I don't have
But all health clubs,
yeah.
and we aren't picking winners or losers. We're taxing everyone.
I do not have those numbers. There's YMCAs all throughout the state. There are a few, I grew up in Derby. In 1994, we approved a bond issue to build a beautiful recreation center in Derby, but, my parents voted for that because I wasn't a voter at that point in time. I don't have that answer. So the question is, I would say the great thing about the United States of America is the free market. There is nothing that says, Trey, you have to work for the League of Kansas Municipalities. I have the freedom to choose. I could go start a business. I'm not gonna go build a for-profit fire department and come in here and complain that the not-for-profit, the government-ran fire departments, I can't get a fire contract because of the government-ran fire departments. That business would not be competitive. So I think somebody has to do the due diligence before they open up a business and figure out, especially in Wichita, there's YMCAs, beautiful YMCAs all over Wichita. You make that business decision and you get to decide what you want to go into. There's nothing that forces you to go into an uncompetitive market besides you think you can make a profit in it. And that's what happened. They get in this market and, well, now we can't make a profit. Oh, I'm going to go to the state for help. So to your question, no, I don't think that's a solution. I think people need to be wise with their business decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I ask?
Representative Wassinger, I would, I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted, go ahead, Jay. I'll let you finish and you can answer my question first. And then
Yeah, I was going to answer, try to at least answer both of your questions. Your first question, do I think that the not-for-profits should be taxed? I think that's a policy decision that the legislature would have to make. I don't want to speak for the not-for-profits and say whether or not they should not be taxed. I think the policy decision in the past has been that the legislature has determined that the public good that they bring to the community is such that they should not be taxed. If that's something that you would revisit, then I think that's a conversation that would have to be had with those nonprofits at the table as well. And I'm not sure that they're here today to speak to that. So I think the KAC would leave it at that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. It sounds like we are picking winners and losers kind of in this. And I am the mother-in-law, or soon-to-be mother-in-law of a small health club, private health club that is working really hard to stay alive, especially after Governor Kelly shut them down. So I just want you to keep that in mind. It's not all giant, shiny, wonderful health clubs that are going on. There are also smaller ones that are struggling to fit in as mine as a CrossFit organization that is small, and they knew they were going to be small, but is it fair that they're paying tax on everything when the recreation departments don't have to? So just a comment.
And here's
Mr. Chair.
Here's my response to that. Property taxes and what happened with COVID are two separate things. They've been conflated. And property tax, I think if cities and counties, as part of our American Rescue Plan dollars, I would encourage them to help those small businesses out and give grants. I would do the same thing as you guys appropriate the $1.6 billion that's coming to the state of Kansas. Can you guys create a fund to help these folks? I think that's a great idea.
Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Trey, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here to give testimony today. And it's interesting your service on our Y board when you were there in town. That was good. Looking at the job description of both for-profits and not-for-profits and what they provide and what they bring to the table. When you served on that board, did you ever have an opportunity to witness the swimming lessons that they provided for all the children of the public education?
Absolutely. They had a mission to teach every third grade, I believe it was second grader, every second grader how to learn how to swim. Just great mission-driven service.
And what did they charge for that, Trey?
Zero.
Zero. Are there any for-profits that are able to provide that type of service or that mission-oriented accomplishment?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. So it really varies from area to area on mission versus, the mission of not-for-profits in some areas versus others. And it just seems like there's a real urban versus rural difference at some point. And then I'm just curious, were you aware of the thousands of dollars of scholarships that the YMCA provided to people in our community?
I absolutely is. I got hit up every year for a contribution to that fund and believed in it.
Were you aware of how many children they provided child care for every day?
I do not know the number, but it's quite a bit.
The number yesterday I checked was 123 in Atchison for residents to come in and leave their children. And how much did they pay for that child care, Trey?
I think part of their mission.
It's either reduced or none.
Yes.
So there's a significant missional difference from some of the YMCA's, at least, and some of the not-for-profits versus the for-profit organizations. And I don't know how you rectify that, but that's what I just want to point out today. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for Mr. Hall. I want to read just a short portion of Congresswoman Jenkins' testimony. Kansas health clubs are in a unique situation. While nonprofit and government-owned entities certainly compete in other industries, this is the only industry in Kansas that I am aware of where tax-paying clubs represent such a small portion of the market compared to other large facilities that pay absolutely no sales taxes, no income tax, and no property tax. Mr. Hall, do you accept or reject that characterization?
I accept that there are certainly differences in the taxing strategy and the taxing scheme regarding private health clubs that are for profit and public health clubs that are not-for-profit clubs. So I certainly think that statement is true. I have not looked to see what the breakdown is on private versus public and what percentage of portion is attributed to each. But I don't think that the statement would be false. So I'm not gonna say that statement is untrue.
Are other conferee care to comment?
I do not have those numbers, Representative Sanders, but I do think going back, I think there's a distinct difference in mission between what the government-ran ones do, what the not-for-profits do, and what the for-profits do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any further questions? Representative Gartner.
Thank you. I don't know, Trey, Mr. Chairman. This is probably more of a comment, but there might be more similarities between nonprofit, for-profit, when you look at golf courses. They're all government-owned. A lot of them are city-owned, government-owned, versus private golf courses. So, according to, I'm not sure health clubs are unique. I think golf courses are very, very similar. Just a comment.
I mean, and I guess that's where I go in my head is you start looking at event space, you start looking at golf courses. I just don't know how you draw that line and where you draw that line if you go down this path.
Mr. Hall, Mr. Calkeen, I have a question I'd like each of you to address on behalf of your associations. Looking at some of the governments, either cities or counties, that have put into place a health club facility, do they take that to a vote of the people, or is it merely a vote of their governing body? At what point do the voters have a say? Because ultimately, if these facilities are built, they are paying. You addressed the, losing the tax base if this bill would go through, and how that would cause the residences, the business owners that would cause an increase in their tax just because of proportionate of the valuation. However, these people are already paying for these government public health facilities. I'm just wondering, do they have a voice in that, or is it just merely a vote of the governing board?
It's going to depend what the financing mechanism is for that facility. So go back to my hometown of Derby in 1994 when they did that facility. It was a bond issue that passed in that case. Lots of times it's the sales tax. Shawnee tried a bond issue, the city of Shawnee tried a bond issue about 1.5 years ago for a health facility. It failed. So the voters had their expression there. I'm not familiar enough with the Lenexa facility to let you know what that is, but it just depends on the different types of facilities and how they pay for it. But lots of times they'll use the sales tax, which sales tax is always an election, or if it's a school district-based rec commission, then they have to have a bond issue to pay for it.
Mr. Hall, do you have a comment?
Certainly, and as Trey pointed out, it is really dependent on how it is paid for, but generally it's either a bond issue, and at the county level, if it's sales tax, obviously that sales tax provision has to be brought to the legislature prior to it being approved for going on the ballot, and then obviously if it is a bond issue, that has to be voted through as well. So, I mean, the people would have their say, and generally I would say also that the community has its say in getting a lot of these things started. Usually this is something that is at the request of the community rather than something that the county commissioners decide to do.
Thank you. Committee, any further questions? I always forget to check online. I don't see any hands raised virtually. See no further questions. Thank you both for your testimony. We have also written testimony opposing House Bill 2445 from Stuart Little and Ron Fair. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as an opponent? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2445 and thank all the conferees for their discussion. Committee, at this time, we would like to take a look at Senate Bill 50. We have heard multiple versions of Marketplace Facilitator. We've heard several versions in the House. We heard yesterday Senate Bill 50, which was identical, very identical to our House Bill 2173. And in the interest of time and not running a House bill across the floor and waiting for the Senate to run it through their committee, I would like to take up Senate Bill 50 at this time and look to the committee for their wishes. Yes, Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee recommend Senate Bill 50 favorable for passage.
And a second from Representative Highland. At this time, I'll turn to the reviser for a quick overview. It's been a while since we've heard this, so do you have a quick overview on Senate Bill 50?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 50 would require the collection and remittance of sales and compensating use tax, transient guest taxes, and prepaid wireless 911 fees by marketplace facilitators with sales subject to tax in the state in excess of $100,000. Marketplace facilitator be defined under the term. Provide, of course, that they would have to collect or remit sales if they make in excess of $100,000. There are certain penalties and interests and other provisions. Under Senate Bill 50, the 911 fee provision would go into effect for the collection on April 1st of 2022. And then lastly, they would also amend the nexus statutes for retailers who in excess of $100,000 would also have to remit and collect or remit. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for the reviser? Yes, Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question, Adam, on Senate Bill 50 on page 2, new section 2. I believe this came up in our conversation maybe on 2395 also. But can you tell me on line 28, it says a marketplace facilitator shall only be required to collect and remit such taxes if the following criteria is satisfied in the previous calendar year. So there was a question, I think, on 2395, whether or not if I reached the de minimis, I went over the de minimis of 100,000, that I wouldn't really have to start until the next year. Was that a question or a concern that I remember?
Mr. Siebers, if I could address that, we will have an amendment that takes care of that into the current.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Your memory is correct. There was an issue with that, so I did prepare an amendment for that. Thank you. Any further questions for the reviser? If not, I will open it up to discussion, and Representative Mason.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment and a procedural question. I have this teed up to where I can email it to all the people. I've also emailed it to Leah. Is it better for her to distribute this or for me?
If you would wish for her to distribute it, we will do that. I would go ahead and email it out. We do have some representatives virtually, and I want to make sure that they all have the amendment.
Can I email it at this point with your permission?
Yes, please do so.
Sending now.
Representative Stogstill and Alcala, if you do not receive that email, will you please let me know? I want to make sure you guys have a copy of what we're working on.
Will do. Will do.
While we are waiting for that to be passed out, in the interest of time, Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
I certainly would. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So basically, in the last few years, we've accomplished remote sellers to register, collect, remit sales tax. With this, we would be compelling marketplace facilitators to do the same thing. So it occurs to me that the line 20 on our Kansas tax return, where it calls for voluntary reporting of use tax, is superfluous. So this amendment would instruct the Department of Revenue to eliminate that from the tax form starting next year.
Thank you. I want to clarify, Representative Stogstill and Representative Alcala, did you receive a copy of the amendment?
We did, right after you said it, he sent it. Thank you. Yes, I received it.
Very good. At this time, I will open it up for discussion on the Mason amendment. Is there any discussion? I'm sure all the amendments will go this easy. Representative Mason, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the amendment does three things. It would simplify our tax preparation for those who are filing the K-40. It would also remove a superfluous line item. And I think it prevents the risk of double taxation. So there will be people who would continue to fill out this line 20, even though they may be having paid tax from an Amazon sale or an eBay sale. If one person is double taxed, that's one too many. So I would prefer to have that line permanently eliminated from the tax form. And with that, I'll renew my motion to amend.
Committee, you've heard the motion from Representative Mason to amend. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Motion carries, and we are back. The amendment is adopted, and we are back on the bill. And yes, Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what the procedure is, and we got a copy. Did the Department of Revenue get a copy of the amendment? Have they seen some of the information you're going to be sending out?
I'm not certain. Did you send it into anyone on the Department of Revenue? Okay. Yes, Representative.
And the only reason is these are cold to me, and if the department has a chance to look at them at the same time, they may be able to pick up if there's a problem in any of the areas. So if the author of the last amendment and any future authors, if we'd send copies to the department, it might be helpful for us also.
Okay, thank you. That's noted.
Thank you.
Adam, do you have copies of all the amendments that you could send those out when they are requested on the committee to Department of Revenue?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Representative Helgerson, I think that's a good point. Thank you. Committee, I do have, as previously stated, an amendment. And Adam, this is the Marketplace Facilitator current year amendment. I believe, Leah, do you have a copy of this one as well? Representative Alcala and Representative Stogstill, have you received a copy?
Not yet. No, not yet. But
Okay.
if you explain it well, I'll be fine. Yeah.
Adam, is that going out on email?
Yes, I just sent out probably 20 seconds ago, so it might take a minute. So there's quite a few people on the list.
I have it. I got it.
Okay,
It's
excellent.
John Alcala.
Okay, committee, this is a fairly straightforward amendment. As Representative Gartner had alluded to, there was some concern when we had the hearing about when this would take effect, and there are on page 2 of the amendment, the first balloon just simply states that during the current or immediately preceding year, so we don't have to wait for the next calendar year for this to kick in. And then the second balloon on the bottom that is numbered number 2, that makes sure to include anyone that has hit that threshold, that $100,000 de minimis for the first time in the current year. So we will pick up both existing and prior customers or prior facilitators, and the reason for the number 2 there is to pick up anyone who has hit that provision for the first time. And I would stand for questions. There are no further questions. I will close and move my amendment. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 50? Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know I have some heartburn on this bill. I'll probably have an amendment that treats all retailers equal, whether they're in-state or out-of-state, with a $100,000 threshold. So make sure that we don't discriminate against our in-state retailers. I also have some heartburn on that threshold with out-of-state retailers that may have multiple owners, and every time they get close to that threshold, they just shift it over to another LLC, and they avoid that threshold for however long they can come up with LLCs. There's several things we're going we're going to have to struggle with on the details there. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out, but I'll probably have that amendment ready. Thank you.
So you do not have an amendment at this time?
No, but I wanted to let you know I probably have it in my briefcase.
Thanks for the warning. Committee, I also would like to make an amendment, propose an amendment to insert the contents of House Bill 2421 into Senate Bill 50. This is the decoupling bill that we have been working on, and I would stand for questions. Actually, we will need a second on that. Second from Representative Avercamp. Yes, Representative Clayton.
If I asked you really nicely to withdraw your amendment, would you?
Well, I appreciate that. No. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment carries. Further discussion on now Senate Bill 50 and House Bill 2421. Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hate to do this, but could do a Representative Baker on you, but I believe I do have an amendment on the new bill with inserting House Bill 2421. So with that, do you have that, Leah?
Mr. Gardner, is this?
This is the PPP. Are you with me?
Yes, sir, I am. Sorry, Adam Siebers. Yes, it's the PPP tax treatment box in the right-hand corner, Leah.
Adam, do you want to try to explain this amendment?
Sure, I'd be happy to explain what the amendment does if you'd like.
Yes, please.
So the changes made on section 5 of the bill, it creates an add back for income tax purposes for the expenses allowed under the federal paycheck protection program. So those expenses, while they would flow through at the federal level, would be added back at the state level. And then secondarily, the provisions on the third page of the amendment, page 10 of the bill of 2421, it strikes those two subsections, and those essentially would then conform those provisions to the federal law. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siebers. Committee, any questions for the reviser? I guess I would have one, Mr. Siebers, on the page 5 balloon that is adding back in there. That would add back in expenses that had been actually deducted at the federal level, so we would not stay coupled with the expensing piece of it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Any further questions for the reviser? Seeing none, Representative Gartner, you may continue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Remember committee early on when we were talking to the CPAs and they talked about double dipping? This is what this is trying to stop, is that if you get a PPP, it's forgiven at the federal level, that portion. It flows through because we're a conforming state to the state level, and it allows you, because we're conforming, it allows you to deduct expenses associated with that income. So if it's classified for given and not income, it's still allowing you to deduct those expenses associated with no income, basically, that they have to declare on their Fed or state income tax. So what this is doing basically is saying, we're going to do a subtraction modification, and you have to add back those expenses to your Kansas tax form on the income that was forgiven. So if I'm getting $10,000 from the feds free, it's a grant, it's not declared, I don't have to count it as income, but all my expenses associated with that $10,000, I can still deduct off my Kansas tax form. So, questions?
Just a moment. We do need a second on that, and we will stand for questions. Representative Helgerson for the second. Discussion committee. Representative Corbett.
So Representative Gardner, just for example, if you had a PPP loan for X number of dollars and it went to payroll, how would the expense be?
Well, Representative Corbett, there are certain things that are forgiven if you have a PPP, and they're lined out there. And so if it's payroll, if it's rent, so you could add up those expenses and deduct them from your state return, even though you don't have any, you're not showing any income from that PPP because it was forgiven, so you don't have to count it as income. Now, the big question is, and Kathleen Smith at KDOR is working on this, we have no idea. Some states are rolling conformity, some states are not allowing it, or we don't have a really good idea. This could have, if we don't do this, it could have a $200 million or more impact on state general fund. So I know KDOR's trying to, the department's trying to come up with a number.
Thank you. Representative Gardner, you apologized when you began your motion, and I will apologize. We're along the same lines, almost. So at this time, I would like to offer a substitute motion, and I have an amendment doing almost the same thing. And I would like to distribute, Adam, I think this is the striking sections 28 and 29 on the PPP provisions. Committee, as you look at this amendment, this is very similar to Representative Gardner's amendment, with the exception that it does not add back in that balloon amendment to include the expensing. And the reason for this, as I was visiting with some of the Kansas Society CPAs, several different other accounting firms, their preference actually was to be fully coupled in both the income and the expensing deductions. There are 32 states currently. I was working with research this morning to try to identify some of this information. Currently, there are 32 states that are fully coupled to the federal code, specifically regarding PPP loans. Not to disagree with my good friend from Shawnee, but if you do not allow those expenses to also flow through as deductibles, where's the benefit? You're remaining open as a business. Maybe you are, because of COVID and other things, you're at a reduced capacity, so that additional income allows you to stay operational. So you're still incurring those expenses. If you don't allow those expenses to flow through, you're not receiving it at the full benefit as intended from the federal government. When these plans first come out, came out, there was some discrepancy. I think the first one was back in March of 2020. The subsequent plans and the subsequent direction from Congress was that they fully intended for the income not to be taxable and for all of the deductions to remain as fully deductible under a forgiven loan. And my intent here is just to fully couple on both the income and the expensing deductions to make sure that businesses are receiving that full benefit as intended from the federal government. And with that, I would need a second on mine, Representative Epley for the second, and open up discussion on the substitute motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Gartner.
I don't like your substitute motion.
I didn't figure you would.
And I understand, but I believe, I don't know, evidently you've checked with the CPAs evidently recently, early on during this committee, they were very concerned about the double dipping. I believe we all heard that. And I'm just thinking how my son would approach this. He owns 2 restaurants in Kansas City, and he's received PPP. And I understand if I have to count that as income, have at it. I'll take those expenses and deduct them in a minute against my income. If I don't have to count it as income, it just seems wrong, not fair. I wish we could all do that. Maybe we should expand itemization and our $1,400 if you did get the Recovery Act, and then itemize whatever expenses associated with it. It just seems to me if it's not income, counted as income, you're going to lower your overall tax liability even more so. And that's where the cost comes in to the state of Kansas, allowing them to deduct those expenses. And it's going to cost us $200 to $300 million, possibly down the road. So I'll leave it up to the wisdom of the committee on which way they'd like to go.
Further discussion? Representative Sanders.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm confused. It seems to me we have 2 amendments working at once. Is that correct or not?
Yes, just for clarification, when you have a substitute motion, the substitute motion is debated at that point. If the substitute motion fails, we are back on the original motion, which would be Representative Gartner's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just for a point of order, you can only have 1 substitute motion. Another one is not in order. So this is the motion we are debating now.
Thank you.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does anybody have any idea how many dollars we're talking about here?
Department of Revenue stated it's very difficult to know what that amount would be.
But probably more than $1 million and maybe hundreds, is that correct? That's pretty wild. I mean, I understand what we're doing here, but boy, I don't, the dollars are just bizarre, you know, and then we hear from some people about how we've already increased state spending by $200 million over what the governor recommended, and now we're reducing the income. Could get kind of sticky. I'm just kind of wondering at some point in time if we could have some numbers. Thank you. Yes,
and I think the ultimate decision there won't be known until these are applied. We know how many of these are forgiven and how many are not. The expenses will remain the same or probably slightly lower than what they have been, but they will have additional revenue to make that up from the PPP loan. But I think that's why it's so hard to quantify this at this time. And honestly, as I was looking at the original bill as it was proposed, I was really trying to work through this and understand it. And that's what drew me to look to see what other states are doing and how they're handling this. And I guess the fact that 32 other states were doing this kind of convinced me that You know, not that if everybody goes to jump off a cliff means I should do it, but I think that's the intent of the federal language, and I would like to follow the intent of that plan. Representative Corbett?
I agree with what you said, that if the point of this PPP is to try to keep businesses afloat so they can get on their feet. It's immaterial how much money the state really has. If you're losing businesses right and left, something needs to be done. And we've got pretty much the foundation done. It's just agreeing on how we're going to finish it up on these two amendments. I think it's needed to keep things moving in the state.
Representative Day?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering if since we don't know technically what the impact would be yet, is there any chance we'd be able to hold off on this kind of process until we do know, maybe?
Oh, certainly, you could hold off. We could defeat the bill and nothing would happen and we would know later on, but it would be after the fact.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Gardner.
May I ask, well, just to answer a question, it's $5 billion, if I remember, in PPP loans to the state of Kansas, Representative Baker. But, I mean, a table motion at some point is always in order, and we could hold on to the bill till we get some answers.
Is that a motion?
Not at this point in time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I just was trying to answer Representative Day's question.
Yes. Are there any further questions? Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to personally say thank you for bringing this substitute. I definitely will be supporting that.
Further questions? I apologize if there's anyone on the, yes, Representative Stogstill. I apologize. I had not been looking at my computer.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some of the same concerns that several other representatives have, is that I absolutely hate voting on something where I have no clue what the numbers are. And it looks to me like we still have time in this session to make some decisions on this. And if we could hold off on this until we come back after the April break and hope that maybe by that time we would have at least some idea as to what we're talking about as far as numbers go here. I don't feel comfortable going back to my constituents and they say, why did you vote for that bill? And what was it going to cost us? And I have to say, I have no clue. So that doesn't seem to me like a very good decision-making process. And I move that we do table this bill until after the April break.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? The motion is to table. And we have a second from Representative Clayton. Any discussion on the motion? Representative Helgerson.
Just a question. Does the motion have to be time specific, meaning to a specific date?
I would turn to the revisor's office to know exactly what the proper handling of a table motion is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Generally, in the past, you have to have a motion to take it off the table, so there really isn't a time date. To me, I don't believe has really any impact. There still would have to be a subsequent motion at some date to take something off the table.
Thank you for that. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Representative Gardner.
Mr. Chairman, I think at this point in time, it might be a good idea to table this. We're talking $300 million. I don't know what the number, that's just for that. And along with this right now, we're dealing with trying to get some direction out of the Treasury. Can we use American Rescue Plan money to decrease taxes or not? That's totally up in the air as far as that decision. So for us, I like to have all the data in front of me. Just similar to Representative Stocksdale before I make a decision. And before I would take anything to the floor and get all these questions about how much money, and we don't have numbers, or we have to say we're not sure. So that's why I'm going to support this motion, Mr.
Thank you. Committee, is there any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a quick comment.
Yes, go ahead.
Again, I also have that concern that Representative Gardner has. I would hate to see us implement any kind of tax policy that might cost us money, federal money coming into the state, because we have used it to reduce taxes, and they would come back and say, well, you can't do that to reduce taxes. So if you reduce taxes 500 million, we're not going to reimburse you that 500 million. So again, I think that's another real legitimate reason to table this at this point until we get some much better numbers to work with, and also to find out what those rules and regulations are going to be as far as getting as much money into Kansas as we possibly can. Thank you.
If I could respond to that comment, I think the estimates that we are anticipated to get in the state of Kansas are somewhere around $1.6 to $1.9 billion. I'm sorry if $200 million is we have to sacrifice that to take this, so be it. I am trying to provide businesses that have been affected by this pandemic adversely. I'm trying to get them, they're trying to get their taxes done. Let's get the money into their pocket. I understand that it could be a cost to the state, but I think it's a cost that is necessary to support our local businesses that have been hit. Some of them have hit extremely hard, and many of them have even closed. So, Representative Helgerson.
I hate to disagree with some of my friends and colleagues, but let me say that first, it's from the information that was provided to the Appropriation Committee from research. I think the amount of the funding that we're expecting is like $3.4 billion, the new money that's coming in, not the 1 point some billion, so it's much more. Second, I understand the desire for moving ahead with tabling it, but I also understand that if we're in conformity with the feds, I can't believe that that is actually going to put us in jeopardy for losing the money. It may lose us the money in our account, but it will not jeopardize a penalty from the feds to being in alignment with them. Am I making sense? I think that we may, I don't know for sure if we're going to lose the money or not, the 100 or 200 million, or if there is any money to lose. But I think that if we're staying in conformity, and some of you heard me make a speech earlier in the year about staying in conformity on a different bill, I don't think the feds are penalizing us for staying in agreement with them on our tax structure. So I think that there's limited, not being an attorney or a tax accountant, but I think that there's less likelihood that that's going to be an issue, but we may lose SGF dollars specifically.
Thank you, Representative Helgerson. Is there any other comments on the motion, the Stogsdill motion to table? Seeing none, Representative Stogsdill, you may close on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I close on my motion.
Committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. Motion fails, and we are back on the substitute motion. Is there further discussion? Representative Stogsdill, were you wanting to speak on further on the amendment or the motion?
I was just trying to mute myself here again.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Representative Baker.
Just for clarity, run that motion by one more time in case I forgot it.
We are currently on the substitute motion, which is the Smith amendment, striking, it is Section 2, subsection A, paragraphs 28 and 29.
This was the motion that came after the Gartner motion. Okay. So.
Yes, we had a motion to table. That motion failed, so we're back on the substitute motion.
Okay, I'm with you.
Sorry about that.
And then, Mr. Chairman, if we were to vote the Smith amendment in the affirmative, that would supersede the Gartner.
Yes, we would be back on the bill. If the substitute motion fails, we're back on the original motion. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm trying to get straight in my head what all's going on here. So I do remember the CPA discussion, and I remember him talking about the double dip, which has been brought up here. Dip number one, as I understood it, was the feds backed the truck up and gave PPP money to businesses, and that's not to be considered income. So that was dip number one. Dip number two was that while you don't have to declare the income, you can fully declare all the expenses related to the money that is not taxable. So that was considered dip number two. Is that correct? And I'm seeing head nods. Okay.
That's correct.
I think we're correct. So the Smith amendment would leave it as that, because I remember the CPA saying that they even went back to the feds and clarified, do you really mean to exclude both the income and the expense? And the answer was yes. So that is what the Smith bill does. And you're saying that that's consistent with what a number of other states has done, 30 some states? Is that what I understood?
Yes, as of this morning, research had referred me to an article that said currently, and I think the article was from March 19th, which last Friday, I think. So that's not exact to the moment data, but as of last Friday, that's what the research had showed. 32 other states had maintained full conformity, both with the income provisions and the expensing the deductions.
Okay, thank you for that. And that doesn't, so then I've heard tax cut, but the other amendment would basically say you can have the income or you can have the money and not declare it as income, but you do need to declare or you do not get to declare the expenses then, correct? So for those states that have stayed fully conforming to Fed, that doesn't really have I mean, I do understand that that's money that we could tax, but this money came into the state, and they're basically not benefiting in terms of taxing any of it. Is that fair?
Yes, and it's my understanding, just in the way my mind works, if you don't allow those deductions, you've effectively taxed that income. And just the way my mind thinks and comprehends that.
Right. The state would be collecting some tax on the fact that that money was given out to that PPP recipient. That's the way I think of it, because they would be disallowing expenses. But I don't see that as a tax reduction necessarily. I guess it's just a point of view. Just, am I missing something?
Nope, that's the way I understand it.
Okay, I'd heard that terminology, so thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to make sure that I get this, but this would appear to be pretty time sensitive to me. I mean, it would be really hard to recoup this next session if we try to go back. We need to do this in this session, don't we? Or not? Am I not understanding? Well,
I'd like to do it right now.
I get that, but I'm just saying if we don't do this now, it's like this opportunity will be hard to get back to at some point.
Well, and I want to explain, and the way this bill is right now, this is not law. Kansas right now is a rolling conformity state, so this is effectively by striking these sections that are in place right now. Like anybody that's doing their taxes right now, they are not including this. I mean, they're following the federal guidelines. They're not including this as income, and they are expensing the deductions because as a rolling conformity state, that's what Kansas law says right now. So by striking these sections and not putting in any expensing, any taxes that are done right now would be, I mean, that's the way they're being done at the moment. Any further discussion? Representative Corbett? Well, I think if discussion is wrapped up, we'll go ahead and vote on it. We wouldn't need to call the question, but I do want to make sure everybody has an opportunity if they wish to comment.
So one more time, Mr. Chairman, if we pass your amendment, then Mr. Gartner, Representative Gartner's amendment is automatically null and void?
That's correct. It is a substitute motion.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, all of those in favor of the Smith amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The Smith amendment is adopted. And we are back on the bill, Senate Bill 50 and the amended House Bill 2421. Is there further discussion? Representative Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment. Do you want me to go ahead and explain it or have the revisor? Okay.
Yes, if you want to explain the amendment while it's being distributed, please.
The amendment would basically be amending 7932-177. And it would make it so an employer cannot claim an employee who's an illegal alien as a deduction for federal income purposes, as well as prohibit claiming any business expense paid to an independent contractor as a deduction for federal income tax purposes unless the independent contractor is registered and utilizing E-Verify. Thank you.
Thank you. We will pause for just a moment to make sure everyone has that amendment. Representative Alcala and Representative Stogstill, unless I hear from you, I will assume that you have received the amendment. So if you do not receive that, please feel free to speak up. I want to make sure we get this information into your hands.
I haven't received it as of now.
Thank you.
There it is. There it is. It just popped up.
Okay. Do we have a second on the Potter amendment? Representative Avercamp, second. Committee, any discussion? I guess I would just like clarification. This just disqualifies the amount that is paid to a illegal immigrant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And how would that information be tracked? How would they report that on how much those wages were?
That would, let's see, it would be tracked based on a separate bill, which also has E-Verify in it being a requirement. I know that the budget currently has the E-Verify requirement in it as well, so from the Senate side.
Okay. If where dollars are kind of a fungible good, how could an employer say that, well, I guess if they just had one employee that would work, but how can they say that those dollars went directly to that employee or not? If that would even be possible.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be possible even if they were using, if it was a requirement to use E-Verify or not. It would be, I mean, even if we had it in law.
Okay.
And I don't know if the revisor can clarify any more on that.
Mr. Siebers, do you have anything to add on that?
Mr. Chair, I really don't.
Okay. Committee, any further questions on the Potter amendment?
I have a question, Mr. Chair. This is John Alcala.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Maybe somebody can refresh my memory, but didn't we have the E-Verify issue come up not too long ago, and agriculture and businesses spoke against that? I'm trying to remember if it wasn't last session, it was the session prior. Does anybody recall?
I don't recall the details off the top of my head. I don't know if the revisor's office or maybe research recalls that.
Yeah, does anybody from the department recall that? I remember it became a big issue and then it went sideline. Nope. Okay.
No, Representative, sorry, from research, I don't have any specific
recollection of debates about this. I know it's come up at various times over the years, but nothing specific that I recall, at least not in my committees.
So, okay, so I get the illegal immigrant component of it, but I do think that there was an agricultural or a farm issue with that. I just don't remember the details because it was several years ago. So thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point of clarification, I guess. Would it be appropriate to ask the maker of the motion, Representative Mason, whether or not he views this as a friendly amendment?
Yes, I would be the maker of the motion on 2421. I would leave it to the will of the body. I think this is, the intent of this is to make sure that the money is going to pay for properly hired and properly documented workers. Does that satisfy your question?
Well, now I'm really confused because I thought we were on SB 50.
We are, and Representative Mason did, technically this is an amendment on 2421, which is the amendment that to merge those two bills together. So that's, as your chairman, that's what I'm stating.
All right. I'm not gonna pretend I totally understand this.
Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This having all businesses having to e-verify every employee, is that what this says?
Mr. Chair, I can answer that.
Yes, please do.
It would be all new employees after the date of December 31st, 2021.
All employees.
All new employees, so not current employees. It'd be new ones hired after this date.
All employees.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for our revisor, please. I opened up the original bill here on my computer, and I'm trying to follow this back to see how the amendment affects the original bill. Is it part of Section 2B, where it says there shall be added to federal adjusted gross income, and this is just one of the things that would be added to the adjusted federal gross income?
That is correct. It would be an add back for Kansas income tax purpose calculation.
So then for the new Section 2B 28, then there would be two parts to that, correct? Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Committee, any further discussion? Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, how can it be verified if you're going to do it? How do you verify all this? And I think that's one major part of the amendment that we need to work out before we even consider it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Gartner.
Following up with Representative Wassinger, I really don't know how this can work. Now we have I wanted an add back, but no, I didn't get the add back, but be that what it may. Here's my real concerns on this, and maybe it doesn't affect, but Representative Akala brought up the ag community. And, you know, I know we have a number of migrant workers that come through the state. I'm just concerned on what kind of impact that would have on E-Verify and, I don't know, maybe some of the ag people can tell me.
Yeah, committee, I guess at this point, I would suggest, it sounds like there's a lot of content here, and it might be my recommendation that we further vet this if we can take a look at this at a later time. Perhaps this is a great idea, but we need some questions answered, so I would consider this an unfriendly amendment at this point, recognizing the importance of it and the necessary for the need for the discussion. But that would be my as the amendment maker for 2421, that would be my, yes, Representative Potter.
I don't know the exact motion, but I'm willing to pull it back for a later date on another bill or enter it as a separate bill. That works.
The proper protocol would just be to withdraw your motion. If that is, I think Representative Avercamp was the second on that. If that is okay with the second, you can simply withdraw the amendment.
I'll withdraw it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing that to our attention and for the discussion. We are back on the bill. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I do have one more amendment. And this, Mr. Siebers, this is the standard deduction amendment.
Mr. Chair, was this the one I prepared for you?
Yes, it should be.
The amounts we discussed earlier today?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Is there a Representative Kessler? Do you have a copy? Okay, committee, I will explain this amendment and then we'll move forward. This is very similar to Representative Gartner's bill that we heard, when was that, last month? Maybe even in January, 2414, that increases the standard deduction. I think it's been, if my research is correct, it's been 33 years since we have had an increase in the standard deduction for individuals. It has been at $3,000 since 1988. I would like to see a $500 increase to the individual, to the married filing status, and to head of household. That ends up being for individuals, singles, that is a 16.67% increase. For married status, it is a 6.67% increase. And for head of household, that's about a 9% increase. The fiscal note on this, it's a little bit smaller than House Bill 2141, I believe was the House bill number. It is $34 million the first year, fiscal year 22. And if you remember the fiscal note from our House bill, the reason that is a little bit inflated is it includes 30% of the prior year. So there's additional money until it balances out in the out years. So in fiscal year 23, the fiscal note drops to $26.4 million. And in fiscal year 24, this fiscal note drops to goes to $26.7 million and increases in the out years from there. But with that, I would look for a second, Representative Epley, and open it up for discussion. Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman, do you happen to know what the fiscal note for the bill is with this amendment?
The fiscal note for the underlying bill, I might have to turn to research for that because we now have the fiscal note for Senate Bill 50, and we also have the fiscal note for House Bill 2421. And if this amendment would pass, it would be an additional $34 million for fiscal year 22 on that. Yes, Representative Mason?
As I recall, and if the committee would recall, having the decoupling for individuals ability to itemize and the standard deduction do not stack, so that wouldn't necessarily be an additional 30.
That's correct. As you increase the number of people that would accept the standard deduction, it would decrease the amount that would try to itemize. So just simply adding those numbers together probably would not give you an accurate fiscal note. I did contact Department of Revenue, but it was really late. It was the 11th hour. I was trying to get an analysis of that if it was possible. I did not hear back from them, but that's not their fault, because it's a lot of information and a difficult thing to try to quantify. Representative Gartner?
Well, Mr. Chairman, 2421 was 118 million, if I remember correctly. Right
Yes.
in front of me. And 34 for your itemization, standard deduction would be 152, then whatever 50 brings in.
Right, but I think there would be the fiscal note of 118 million would be reduced somewhat, because part of that was 65 million for the itemized. So there would be a reduction there. I have no idea what that number would be for sure, though. And one of the reasons I did not just insert the contents of Representative Gartner's bill, that was a $45 million fiscal note the first year, and then I think down into 36 or 37 in the out years. I just wanted to do a flat $500 increase and see what that was. I think it's high time we gave everybody in Kansas a little bit of tax break. This bill, if we put this amendment on, this bill would touch every income taxpayer in Kansas. Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me with all this paperwork. Where is this being inserted exactly?
This would be an insert into a new piece. It's an amendment that is not within the bill statute. It is KSA 7932-119.
Are you attaching it to any of the bills that we just went through that we haven't?
It would be inserting this language into this bill.
Which bill are you talking about, 2421 or 50?
We are on Senate Bill 50, which is now a combination of
24, 21, and 50. Okay.
yes. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's starting to sound like judiciary. You only got 7 more bills to put in here. So can we agree on kind of a ballpark number on what we're talking about here on millions of dollars? And I understand the itemization question, but there's only 7% of the people that itemize right now. So 118 million, can you kind of add those up? Just help me out there a little bit.
I'm looking up the latest fiscal note.
Well, I know if I bring my amendment and then by happen chance it would pass, that's going to add probably another $30–40 million to the giveaway.
It looks like, judging from the fiscal note on Senate Bill 50, the state general fund is $35.5 million. It's $42.4 million total. SGF is 35.5. So effectively, the increase in the standard deduction is just about a wash.
Okay.
So we're still looking and understanding that it might reduce that fiscal note on the itemized deductions. We're still probably around that 115 to 120 million. I think that's an accurate, educated guess.
Somewhere we just needed some kind of number. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? I apologize, I did not have my WebEx up. If there's any questions online. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just trying to think back to this conversation, but these are still coupled. So in other words, if I take a standard deduction on my federal, I still have to take the standard on Kansas, and now we're raising that to make it a little bit more acceptable. Is that fair? Thank you.
House Bill 2421 would decouple on the itemization. So if you took the standard deduction at the federal level, you could now elect to either itemize on your state or take the standard deduction, understanding that if you just took the standard deduction at the state level, you would get an increase if this amendment passes.
All right. Thank you very much.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the standard deduction amendment by myself, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are back on the bill. Are there any further discussion? Representative Gartner.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this bill now, but I'd rather have House Bill 2446, but which is the bill I introduced. But we're real close. You know, if we added digital goods in this bill, we could get that fiscal note down to 60 million. So just, you know, something to think about.
Chair would recognize Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to insert as an amendment the contents of House Bill 2239, the loss carry forward bill.
Do we have a second? Representative Awerkamp. Any further discussion? Mr. Siebers, would you give us just a quick overview? What was 2239? I believe just the history on that. That was the net operating loss carry forward bill, and I think that passed across the floor. Gosh, was it 120 to 3, something like that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, you have a very good memory. As I'm pulling it up here, the vote on the House was 123 to 0. What House Bill 2239 did was it would allow net operating losses starting for corporations in tax year 2018, essentially to be coupled to the federal treatment of the net operating loss. Currently, I believe they're unlimited in duration, but it would essentially be coupled to going forward to the feds.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Highland, I appreciate this amendment because we did send this bill out across the floor. And to my knowledge, the Senate has not done anything with it yet. So this would be a way to get that House language back in play. So is there any further discussion on the Highland amendment? Seeing none, Representative Highland, you may close.
I move my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Highland to amend. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Did you have an additional one, Representative Highland?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment. I'd like to amend the contents of House Bill 2106 into Senate Bill 50.
Do we have a second? 2106, is that what?
Yeah, 2106.
Representative Corbett, was that a second? Same thing, Mr. Siebers, would you give us just a quick history on that one? My memory fails me on that. I can't remember what that one passed by.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was also a 123 to 0 vote. I'm guessing those were the same day. House Bill 2106 was dealt with the extension of when corporate tax returns would be required to be filed. Essentially, they would be they would also kind of correlate with when they'd be filed with the Federal Internal Revenue Code. Without having to apply for an extension when they'd already be given by default.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
I close.
Committee, you've heard the motion by Representative Highland to amend. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Motion carries. We are back on the bill. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Mason, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I renew my motion to recommend Senate Bill 50 favorably for passage.
Committee, you've heard the motion by Representative Mason. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion carries. Committee, that concludes our business for the day. Thank you very much for all of your hard work on the floor today.